Ya, langsung aja slide. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar, Value of ESG Implementation, Mitigating Risks and Creating Opportunities, which is presented by Center for Risk Management and Sustainability CRMS and Cardno, supported by Indonesia Risk Management Professional Association IRMAPA, Enterprise Risk Management Academy ERMA, and also Lembaga Sertifikasi Profesi Mitra Kalyana Sejahtera LSP MKS. Next. So before we start our sessions, I would like to go over a few things. The first one is the ground rules. This is to let you know on how you could participate in our discussion today. The first one is, if you have any questions, please type in your question in the Q&A pane at the control panel. You could see the control panel at the bottom of your screen. You could send in your questions at any time during presentation, but please make sure that you mention your name as well as organization as you send in your questions. We will address the questions at the end of every presentation. We know the time is limited, but we will try our best.
Hi, everyone. I think Nita has just lost internet connection, so she'll be back in just a moment to carry on with the ground rules. But I think essentially she was about to jump into the rundown and start explaining the brief format, which I'll go ahead and carry on until Nita returns. So as you can see on the slides here, what we're going to be covering is a bit of scene setting and opening remarks from Pak Anton that Nita will introduce in a moment. And then we're going to jump into the basics of ESG 101. That's going to get us all on the same page and understanding ESG in a similar way. And then we're going to get into that ESG 101, but in the Indonesian context. Then we're going to go over the E, the S, the G, and we'll finish up by having a question and discussion period at the very end. Although after each of the E or the Indonesia, E and S and the G, we'll give you a quick opportunity to ask a few specific questions to the panelists and speakers. I'm just checking to see if Nita has returned.
Hi, Brian, sorry.
Problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the technical problem that I had just now, but I'm back now. So to kick things off, I would like to introduce Dr. Antonius Alijoyo. He is the principal and chairman of Center for Risk Management and Sustainability, and he will deliver the welcoming note for today's webinar. Please welcome Dr. Antonius Alijoyo.
Greeting audience. Today we got an honor of having some experts and specialists as well as some practitioners to share with us about the value of ESG implementation, creating opportunities and mitigating risk. ESG, as we know, stands for Environmental Social Governance. We got an honor today. This webinar is going to be hosted and facilitated by Brian Kraft. Actually, he's an international expert and also practicing ESG, and so as well as the international consultants that help many international companies in implementing ESG in their particular country. Brian worked for Cardno International, specializing in ESG advisory. Besides Brian, I would like also to say thank you with Pak Heru P. Yuda, the owner of Kahulu Cafe, who actually can share the real experience of adopting, implementing ESG while actually then practicing his business integrated with the ESG concept and value proposition. We also got a kind of the opportunity to hear from Ibu Maria Ratnaningsi. She's a very foremost academician in this particular field. She holds actually the environmental science and now active in University of Indonesia. Last but not least, we welcome as well Pak Bakhtiar Manurung. He's at the moment is the advisor providing consultancy in the ESG. He's now today working in the Moore and Rollins, helping many clients in this particular field. Overall, this webinar, we do hope that will give participants total perspective, total understanding what is actually ESG, environmental social governance, as one of the particular mega trend today that any companies, any organization in the world need to understand and then try to adopt it at the earliest in order to gain the right momentum and create the optimal value creation of having ESG in place in their organization. We would like to thank you, Brian. Thank you, Pak Heri Yuda. Thank you, Ibu Ratna. Thank you, Pak Bakhtiar. And to all of you, the participants, enjoy and then congratulate all of us. And let me express my saying, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Antonius, for the welcoming speech. So to kick off with the first presentation, I would like to invite Mr. Brian Kraft. So please, Brian, to take over.
Thanks, Nita. Appreciate that. And thanks also to Pa Anton for the very kind introduction from CRMS. And I would like to say greetings from Melbourne, Australia. If you're in Jakarta, as many of you are, I think you guys are just now recently under PSBB or PSBB 2. So in that case, we are all brothers and sisters in lockdown together. We are very much locked down here in Melbourne as well. So hello from my home. Very briefly, I would like to introduce myself and Cardno for those who have not come across Cardno before. Cardno is a global professional services provider that specializes in delivery of complex development programs. We've been working in Indonesia for almost 30 years, implementing large-scale social and environmental and technical advisory programs, oftentimes in collaboration with the Indonesian government, as well as the Australian government and several others like multilaterals and also private companies in Indonesia. We've got a pretty large office in Jakarta, so swing by, check us out. There's 25 corporate staff there and a bit over 250 project staff in Jakarta. So you have the bad luck of speaking to one of the people in Melbourne and not in Jakarta. I myself, I'm a senior consultant and strategy advisor. I've been working with Cardno on various initiatives for probably about 3 years now, on and off. Prior to that, I lived and worked in Indonesia for 6 years, I think it was, as a government relations consultant. Walaupun saya masih ingat bahasa Indonesia sedikit, hari ini kami akan pakai bahasa Inggris biar semua bisa pahami. We've got a few participants from outside of Indonesia and Australia and the US. So we will carry on in English. But the focus of today will be on Indonesia as our primary case study for ESG. Now, let's jump into today's topic, ESG. But to qualify, I want to be sure, by no means do I consider myself a true ESG expert. Many of you joining here today are probably deeper practitioners and have a deeper understanding than I do of ESG, which is why I'm very much looking forward to bringing out the expertise of all of you that have joined us virtually today, as well as why I'm thrilled to have three practitioners who not only understand ESG better than I, but they also use it in various forms with their professions. But before we jump over to these three esteemed speakers, I'm going to provide a very high-level overview of what ESG is so that we can all be on the same starting page. So if you could move to the next slide. Excellent. Essentially, ESG is a non-financial evaluation tool. Let's answer two simple questions that I've got here on the slide to get us all on the same page. Number one, what is ESG? Pak Anton has already provided us a little bit of a sneak peek, but as we all know, it's environmental, social, and governance, and then that's usually followed by indicator or factor, like ESG indicator, for example. It is a tool that is used, that uses an array of non-financial indicators grouped into three buckets, the E, the S, and the G. Together, these three factors evaluate an organization's societal and sustainable readiness and impact. Before ESG, which ESG kind of became a concept around the turn of the century, around 2000 or 2002. Before that, most companies were pretty much evaluating themselves or being evaluated by purely financial performance indicators, such as gross profit, debt equity ratios, return on investment, the stuff that we're all very familiar with, companies being evaluated on. But then in comes ESG, and by measuring ESG factors as well as financial, all of a sudden we can now have a much more holistic picture of an organization and its long-term viability. Let's now zoom in just a little bit into those three unique parts, just to make sure that we understand what the E and the S and the G really mean. So taken in part, the E is for environmental or environmental criteria, and that measures your climate change readiness and the environmental impact of your operations and supply chain. This often includes energy consumption or carbon emissions, waste, water, ecological impact, these kind of things. Heru is going to speak a little bit more about the E in just a bit and provide some real-world context. And I know Ibu Ratna can also jump in on E as well, very proficiently. The S is for social criteria, measuring your human rights and social impact with people and communities, organizations, anybody that your company comes directly or indirectly in contact to, including your own employees, labor, consumer relations, modern slavery. These are all elements that are wrapped into and measured by the S. And then the G, finally, is for governance. Governance criteria measures your internal operational systems and controls and procedures, which your company uses to govern itself, make decisions, or comply with legislation or regulation. It's important to note, though, that these three elements are oftentimes intertwined or perhaps complementary of each other. For example, let's assume that a company's strong governance systems mean that the board of directors, for example, are briefed on a company's climate preparedness. Okay, so now you've got the governance overlapping with the environment, E. But that climate preparedness includes issues of mass migration, which is which is the S. So all of a sudden, in that one little glimpse, we see how the E and the S and the G are inextricably intertwined sometimes, and that's why they must be measured in aggregate and taken as a whole. Excellent. Jumping to the second question, what is ESG useful for? Oh, sorry, go back one slide. Thank you. What is ESG useful for? But Antano already hinted at this, but practically speaking, ESG is used as a tool to either self-evaluate on your ESG factors or to employ third-party organizations to evaluate you using the many ESG methods and frameworks that are out there. But thinking more strategically, we know that strong ESG position can safeguard your company's long-term success by reducing risk and identifying opportunities, building a stronger brand and reputation, making it easier to attract talent and easier to retain talent, easier to attract money and capital. These kind of things can come with a really strong foundation of ESG. Next slide. Now, I wanted to get the elephant in the room out of the way early before we get too deep into the question and answer. Does ESG work? Now, there's arguments for and against. The negative arguments goes back all the way to Milton Friedman's economic theory, which to this day helps maintain the historical assumption that a lot of people hold that ethically directed investments, including sustainability, reduce financial return. But every day, the evidence continues to mount to the contrary. The growing weight of accumulated research and evidence and capital flows that are moving suggests that Friedman was wrong, and operating sustainably and ethically actually adds value. And ESG is a way to find the companies that are taking this really seriously. As you can see in this little chart that I've included here from McKinsey and Company, from about 2,000 studies on the impact of ESG, 63% of them are showing a strong ESG position correlates with alpha, or with a higher equity returns and reductions in downside risk, while only 8% of these studies suggest that ESG might reduce revenue. So the more and more we progress, the more and more sure that the markets and CEOs and key decision makers around the world are that ESG really matters and it really does work. We're going to jump to the next slide. Great. So now that you know what ESG is and you know that it works, let's put that into the context of what Anton was talking about, the megatrends, which is really continuing to grow and gain steam this century. And I'm talking about sustainability writ large. Globally, sustainable investments now exceed US 30 trillion in value, which is a meteoric rise of about 68% since 2014. That is really, really rapid. And it's a 10-fold increase since 2004. What's more is that millennials stand to inherit another 30 trillion from baby boomers in the coming years. And as we know, millennials are far more likely to choose investments based on environmental and social concerns. So there's only going to be more capital directed towards sustainable investments in the years to come. This is a trend that is only continuing to gain steam. Demand for the sustainable investments and products is rising really quickly as a result. And supply is racing to catch up to make sure that there's enough sustainable and ethical investments where people can put their money in. Batiar will go into this a bit more, but I think it's a really key indicator of how far the thinking has shifted in the last few years about sustainability. Was made evident when the US Business Roundtable issued a statement aimed at redefining their first commitment to stakeholders rather than just shareholders. That's a pretty monumental ideological shift that's happening in some of the most important boardrooms around the world. Amidst all of this, ESG serves as a really important tool to quantify, to value, and to rank an organization's non-financial indicators, such as sustainability. Without ESG, this sustainable megatrend could risk being too scattershot or greenwashed, as you hear a lot, not grounded in anything measurable. ESG allows us to actually measure and quantify what we're dealing with. Next slide. Excellent. So with this slide, I wanted to look at where ESG fits into that sustainability megatrend that we've been talking about. This slide is my conceptualization of that fit. At the top, you'll see the UN SDGs, and over on the left side as well, the SDG wheel, the 17 SDGs. And I think that these serve as a high-level definition of our targets, of what we're actually striving for here. What's our objective? It creates a sort of shared global language, or a backdrop, if you will, for the human rights and sustainability zeitgeist. When you subdivide the 17 criteria, as you see over there, you can actually map the 3 elements of ESG onto those subdivisions pretty easily. So you can see where I've put the G and the S and the E around there. So it maps over pretty naturally to the UN SDGs, which makes the SDGs serve as a useful backdrop. ESG sits, I think, just in front of the SDG backdrop as essentially a selection of various global standards and frameworks for measuring ESG. I've got a bunch of examples here that you can see just below the green box. There's heaps of these, the CDP, GRI, ISO. There's so many ways to sort of cut the cookie and to measure ESG. You don't need to learn all of these as a non-ESG professional, but just be aware for now that there's a lot of them out there, and they're all slightly different. They have their own flavor, their own standard, their own framework for how to measure ESG. Then beneath ESG, you've got a whole bunch of organizations that use these ESG standards and frameworks for many things, such as corporate disclosures. A company might use an ESG framework to disclose something publicly. Other companies might use those frameworks and standards to analyze the market or produce ratings or rankings of companies or indices, such as Indonesia has the Kehati Index. Globally, you've got things like the S&P True Cost or Sustainalytics or MSCI, to name a few of the ones that we're quite familiar with. Then below that, one rung further, you've got investors, small and large. They come along and use all the organized information to guide their socially responsible investing, using exclusionary screening, perhaps. No tobacco, for example, is a quite common one. Or they can use positive screening. I only want companies that hit a certain mark in their ESG ranking, or impact investing methods. There's various ways that the investors can find the places to park their money using ESG. Then at the very bottom, there's a whole bunch of other ways that you can use non-financial measures or ESG metrics, such as for your branding and marketing. If you want to really show what your company is doing and the extra effort that your company is doing. Compliance can use this data. Shared value strategy can use this. Modern slavery mitigation, UNGP the UNGP COPs, for example. There's all sorts of other applications. Once you kind of get your ESG house in order, it spills over into a lot of other things and can be very valuable. Next slide, please. Right, so as you likely gathered from the last slide, there are obviously too many ways to measure ESG. There are too many standards and too many frameworks out there, and it can become quite problematic. Making it worse, private companies oftentimes will kind of create their own ways of measuring ESG. And this has the risk of sometimes greenwashing the data that they're presenting, or obfuscating the real weaknesses within that company So they might only be presenting their good side, but then not presenting their bad side. So we need a way to kind of align all of these different disparate ways of measuring ESG. Now, the exciting thing is the process to establish a single and comprehensive corporate reporting system has actually recently begun, very recently. 5 leading frameworks and standard-setting institutions for ESG methods agreed earlier this month in September to work together on creating joint guidelines combining all of their methods. This is a really, really big deal, and potentially one of the few silver linings of the coronavirus period that we're in, where all of these ESG raters said, we've got time. And it seems like they're actually coalescing to form something unified. Together, these 5, they guide an overwhelming majority of quantitative and qualitative sustainability disclosures globally. And I think if within a few years they succeed at building a joint framework, their gravitational pull alone could be big enough to draw in all the other methods and really put a lot of pressure on companies to use this standardized method of ESG. As a result, I think we can expect ESG to become a lot more useful and influential even than it is now, as it becomes more consistent across time periods, more comparable across companies and geographies, and more easily certifiable or auditable or transparently arrived at. We won't have these black boxes where people are doing ESG in the darkness. We'll be able to see what they're doing and compare. So keep an eye on this. I think this is really interesting and really important. Yeah, I think we're at a precipice of ESG is really going to get roaring once we get a standardized metric. Excellent. That's next slide, please. That's all I wanted to present to you guys as far as just a really high level introduction about what ESG looks like globally. And now we're going to zoom in with the help of Batiar on ESG in Indonesia. But before I hand it over to Batiar, let me first introduce him briefly. So Batiar is a certified sustainability reporting specialist and assurer. He helps Moores Rowland Indonesia build its sustainability reporting and business and human rights advisory business. He is currently leading a study on sustainability reporting in all publicly listed companies in Indonesia to assess their sustainability reports compliance with national and global standards. So this is, we're really lucky to have Batiar here today. He is a real practitioner of these reporting mechanisms. So without further ado, Batiar, we're very excited to learn from you.
Thank you, Brian. First and foremost, I'd like to thank CRMS and also Cardno for giving me the opportunity to speak on this very important event. Before I present to you the illustration of ESG reporting in Indonesia, I would like to echo what Pak Anton and Brian has mentioned in their remarks, that there has been a shift in how business runs their operation. There has been a mega trend. Next slide, please. If we can turn to the next slide, please. So, yeah, ESG is the new normal. And this has nothing to do with wearing masks or washing your hands regularly. So what I mean with ESG is the new normal is that there has been movement that leading global companies realize that sustainability of their business can't be achieved without integrating ESG factors and improving their ESG performance. And we have also seen that more and more investors looking to invest in companies that have a strong ESG. The most recent and noteworthy example of this is the letter of BlackRock CEO. BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world that really cares about ESG. In the letter, the CEO of BlackRock mentioned their conviction that sustainability and climate integrated portfolio can really provide better return to investor. On top of that, he also mentioned that companies that do not respond to stakeholders and address sustainability risk or ESG risk will encounter growing skepticism from markets. Next slide, please. Another recent and noteworthy ESG-related initiative is the Business Roundtable Statement of Purpose of Corporation, which Brian has mentioned briefly. Business Roundtable is an association of US leading companies. So the statements was signed by 181 CEOs that represent nearly 30% of US market capitalization. So CEO of companies like Apple, BlackRock, JP Morgan, and also BP commits to a new purpose of corporation to serve all stakeholders like customer, employees, suppliers, communities, and also protect the environment. Instead of just focusing on serving the shareholders. So, in other words, the CEO of these companies commit to consider ESG impacts in running their business. Morshroland Indonesia is currently preparing similar initiative to really encourage Indonesian companies to embed ESG consideration in their business, and we hope this will really expedite ESG adoption in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So let me move on to the focus of my presentation, which is, of course, ESG information reporting through sustainability report in Indonesia. Actually, the reporting of environmental factor, social factors, and governmental factors have been regulated by Indonesian regulation more than a decade ago. The first one that we note is that in 2006, BAPOPAM, or Indonesia Capital Market Regulatory Agency, issued regulation in 2006 that requires all publicly listed companies to report governance, social, and environmental activities in the company's sustainability annual report. And then this was followed by Law Number 40, 2007 on Limited Liability Company, or Undang-Undang Perseroan Terbatas in bahasa Indonesia, and it's implementing regulation, government regulation on company social and environmental responsibilities. And this is not only for public companies, but this regulation mentioned that all companies that manage and use natural resources should report the social environmental responsibility activities in their annual report. But although this annual report has included governance information, environmental and also social, but the size of this ESG information in annual reports is considered less than ESG information in a standalone sustainability report. SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, especially Indonesian government commitment to achieve SDG, has really advanced sustainability discussion, sustainability reporting preparation in Indonesia. And this was further advanced by, of course, this is what the most important part of my presentation is the OJK regulation number 51, 2017 on sustainable financial implementation. This regulation requires all publicly listed companies, which around more than 600 companies, also financial service institutions, of course, banks, to prepare sustainability report and to submit the report to the OJK. Next slide, please. So the OJK regulation number 51, 2017, by the way, OJK means Indonesia Financial Service Authority. The regulation requires that banks with equity more than 5 trillion rupiah, foreign bank, to prepare sustainability report for the year 2019 and submit to OJK no later than April 2020. And then banks with equity less than 5 trillion, public company, insurance companies, financing companies should prepare sustainability report for the year 2020 and then should submit the report to OJK no later than April next year. The OJK actually has provided criteria for the sustainability report. Sustainability report that has to be prepared and submitted to the OJK should include sustainability policy, for example, and of course, sustainability performance that include economic, environmental, and social. The governance factors has also been required in the report, but this is not governance in general terms, but sustainability governance. And then even contribution to the SDGs is also required to be disclosed in the sustainability report. Next slide, please. So as mentioned by Brian, I'm now leading a study on sustainability report of all publicly listed companies in Indonesia. We are trying to assess how mature is the sustainability reports, whether they have met national regulation, which is the POJK 51, and also whether they have met the international standards, particularly GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. And we found very encouraging results. For example, because of the POJK 51 issuance, we've seen that there is a significant increase of the number of sustainability reports issued by publicly listed companies. There was a 60% increase in the number of sustainability report in 2019 compared to 2017. And we've also found that some publicly listed companies prepare sustainability report for the first time for the year 2019, even though the requirement for them to prepare such report will only start for the year 2020. So this is a positive result. So another findings that we found so far based in our study is that 55% of the sustainability reports, the 76 reports in 2019 have met 80% criteria of POJK. This is a very positive result. I mean, they met almost most of the criteria, considering this is the first time those companies prepare a report in accordance with POJK. And then 76% met sustainability governance criteria. And this relates with our discussion today. This number, that 76% of the report met sustainability governance criteria, suggests that those companies already have procedures in place to manage ESG and sustainability risks. And we can see, as we can see on the screen, 82% of the 67 report present information on contribution to the SDGs. As we can see in Brian's last slide, SDGs has really encouraged, stimulate the uptake of sustainability and ESG discussion and reporting in Indonesia. And we've also found that 95% of the sustainability reports are prepared in accordance with GRI, which indicates that the 67 companies are familiar with international standards. This is a very positive result. However, only 9% or 6 companies that have disclosed that they have human rights policy and human rights due diligence in practice. This is a stark contrast to the sustainability report of global companies. Most global leading companies have disclosed their human rights policy and practices in their sustainability report. And the most important and interesting fact that I can share today is that Global Reporting Initiative GRI standard is now being updated. And in the last draft of GRI standard, human rights policy, human rights due diligence disclosure is required. So, of course, we hope that Indonesian companies, publicly listed companies, don't want to, be left behind on this. So, next slide, please. So, I think that would be the end of my presentation. And I'll really be pleased to answer any questions related with my presentation in the Q&A session later at the end of this webinar. And you can also ask me about how to move forward with the ESG sustainability uptake in Indonesia. Thank you. Back to you, Brian.
Excellent, Batiar. Thank you. That's really, really useful and very interesting. If you guys have a specific question for the speakers, as Nita said, feel free to just drop it into the little Q&A tab right now, or you can wait and you can put it to us for the end, for the discussion and question session at the very end. But I'm going to go ahead and throw one question at you, Batiar, before we move on, if I may. You mentioned that the type of entities that OJK requires to submit a sustainability report either this year or the following year. But large financial institutions had to go first. So my question is, do you think that their disclosures are detailed enough to include their investments, to really measure the sustainability of the entities that they're investing in or that they're lending to? As in, is this just a tier 1 sustainability report, or are they also reporting on the sustainability of their tier 2?
Thank you for the question, Brian. What I can share with you is that the Financial Service Institution Sustainability Report, particularly bank sustainability report that we've studied, actually that have been released in 2019, mostly prepared in accordance with GRI and even SASB, Sustainability Accounting Standard Board. So the report were prepared based on the highest quality of global standards. I think that should give you a picture of how mature is the sustainability information, ESG information that have been presented by these financial service institutions sustainability report. The information, ESG information, mostly, of course, still related with tier 1, mostly the bank's operation, but they've also disclosed how they require the lenders, borrowers, how they use the sustainability and ESG factors in their investment decision.
That's really cool. Yeah, because then you might start to see a cascade effect from the big financial institutions down into the smaller medium enterprises and down into the micro business as well. So that's really interesting. We'll watch how that becomes a catalyst in Indonesia. Right. If we could go to the next slide, please, Fadli. So we're going to take a little bit of a pulse check now. So everybody, grab any device that you have. Your mobile is probably the easiest way to do it. And just go to menti.com, type in 811775.8, and it'll pull up 2 questions that we've got for you. So we want to poll the audience and just kind of get a pulse check for where you guys are with your own ESG journey, and collect a little bit of feedback from you guys. So just jump over to menti.com. I'll give you a sec to pull that up. So let's see. Yeah, great. We've got a few people have checked their answers in. What I'm going to be asking, you'll see, is how would you describe your company's ESG or other non-financial measures and disclosures? So I just want to get a sense of, are most of you from very mature ESG developed companies? Are you somewhere right in the middle? Are you just starting out on your ESG journey? So we'll get a sense of that. And once we've got more people signed on here, we'll jump over and show you the results so you can kind of see where you sit. And this is completely anonymous. You won't be able to see who's putting what answer where. So don't worry. Be completely honest. Say non-existent. Say whatever you like. this is completely anonymous. Great, we've got a bunch of answers coming through. 20 answers already. Yeah, 25. Cool, just a little bit longer, Fadli, and then we'll switch over to the answer sheet. Cool, that's quite good. Okay, yeah, jump over to the answer sheet real quick, Fadli, and let's show people what the initial answers are looking like, just so you can kind of know where you sit within the context. Yeah, so that's what the answers are looking like. So most people are saying early stage. We don't report that much, which is good because this is an ESG 101 webinar. So this is what we were hoping for, actually, what we were expecting. We've got a few non-existent. That's also what we were expecting. Yeah, and we've also got some really sophisticated companies here. 5 have come back and said that they're at international ESG standards already, which is really good. These are sort of banner setters, or people where these organizations can pave the way, and their sustainability reports and public disclosures can be used by other companies to follow. Great. I think we'll, yeah, we've got 32 in. We'll jump over to the second question now. So let me just transfer this over. Now you should be able to see on your devices a second question. I'm asking here for you to arrange these by the most relevant aspect of ESG for you and or your company. So give them a ranking, first to second to third. For those of you who have still not answered, menti.com and type in 81, 17, 75, 8. All right. Fadli, if you want to switch over to the slide that will let us see the answers to question 2. Great. Ooh, it's very, very close. Almost a tie between governance criteria and environmental criteria, with S trailing just a little bit behind. Oh, E has just leapfrogged G. Neck and neck. Excellent. Okay, I think this is clear, and I bet none of the panelists will be surprised at what we're seeing here, which is that E and G are typically a little bit prioritized first, and then S usually comes a little bit after. And this is in line with what Batiar was saying as well, where a lot of the sustainability reports that he's seeing may not be touching on a human rights policy just yet. Great. So why don't we jump back to the slide deck, Fadli? You can keep putting in your answers. That's just fine. But we're going to switch the visuals of the webinar back over to the slide deck. Thank you guys for putting in your answers. That's really quite interesting. Right. Okay. Well, moving things right along, we're going to jump back into the content. We're going to go over to the E for environmental with Heru Yuda, the founder of Kahulu Coffee. Kahulu is a non-for-profit specialty coffee producer with poverty reduction and environmental sustainability as its foundation. Kahulu Coffee believes that Indonesia coffee production can be both sustainable and valuable for farmers. Prior to this, Heru worked as project manager for Inveritas, a New York-based assurance organization that builds sustainability solutions for smallholder coffee farming communities that are currently beyond the reach of existing certification and verification approaches. So he's got some really interesting real-world experience. And yeah, without further ado, over to you, Heru, to learn more.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for CRMS and Cardno for this opportunity. I believe we are in for a treat later on for the Q&A session. And I think I would like to start that any industry, and coffee is by no exception, evolve, from the products at its core. And in coffee, the product is the coffee beans. As you see, like the demands growing in the industry growth, later we understand that, here and there, companies might have, overshoot, its reach in a sense, towards the environment. In Indonesia, for instance, the major environmental issue that companies are facing are deforestation. How land use from forest to plantation has led to not only environmental disaster, but also economic and social, perils for the community around that area. So understanding that is a major learning or a major shift, as Brian and the other speaker have mentioned earlier. And when industry, arrive at that realization, usually the problem is too big to solve for one company. So that is why collaboration is not only important, but also a must if we're going to solve the environmental issues that we are facing. And for agricultural sector and coffee especially, we actually at the mercy of the mother nature. We cannot disregard this as negative externalities as the oil and gas company, for instance. And this is why when we're talking about building a sustainable coffee company, sustainability needs to be embedded in the business model. And what I've learned so far in Indonesia is that many, if not majority, of the coffee companies have not been able to do so because they are only realizing it at the later stage when the cost of internalizing this negative externalities is already skyrocketing in their balance sheet. So with that, I would like to start my journey at Kahulu Coffee with you, and the reason I started this not-for-profit company, and that is for the key mission to address the problem that the SDG goals highlight as the poverty alleviation and climate change mitigation. So without realizing it, we look at this problem as those that are impossible to solve. But upon closer inspection, for instance, we might be able to find agents or tools in how do we address this such a massive global problem. And for instance, with coffee, it's only able to grow in high elevation area, so it's likely located, quite in the rural hinterland. Usually, the poorest of the poor of the populations, usually are there. So when we address the problem, environmental problem in this location, we might be also address the problem of poverty, and that is why, in our opinion, the environmental and the social aspect of the ESG is not only compatible or complementary, they are inseparable. One could argue you could prioritize one over the other, but in one small case, for instance, you cannot have a community that support reforestation effort without their basic needs are being met. And in that sense, you need to fulfill the needs for the social first, for the community first, then you get to the needs for the environment. Let me stop there and for the short intro, and let us focus back on the discussion about environmental in coffee today. So if we can move over to the next slide, please. So as mentioned before, we are not for-profit company, and our product is actually not coffee. The main products that we offering to the industry is actually impacts. Coffee is the byproduct that we have, because when we're working with coffee farmers, absorbing and helping them gain market access is one incentive that we might be able to do as well. So it's byproduct, the real values that we want to achieve. At the moment, we are only present in Indonesia, and looking into start of the farmers field school training in 3 provinces in Indonesia. That is Aceh, North Sumatra, and West Sumatra, for a very unique reason. One is that these 3 provinces, and morely for the first 2, Aceh and North Sumatra, they are the cornerstone or the center of the production of the Indonesia Arabica coffee production. These 2 provinces contributed, 66% of total Arabica production in Indonesia, and the Sumatra Mandailing, coffee is one that is widely traded internationally, could also be, coming from other parts of Sumatra, and West Sumatra here is added to the mix for the second reason, and that is it's dear to my heart because that's where I come from, and I see it as a potential coffee growing area as well. There are 3 rationales where we're thinking that it is pertinent for Kahulu to start, campaigning for sustainability for coffee industry in Indonesia, and one that is on the adverse effects of climate change for coffee, not only for production but also for quality. We can talk about it a little bit more, but just to give you a quick example, in 2017 there's a slightly elongated dry season in Indonesia that affects the harvest seasons in coffee regions in Indonesia. And by some accounts, the total productions of coffee harvest during that year was contracted between 40 to 60%. Now, if you are a company that trading commodities globally, this is a major risk from one of your major sourcing areas, because not only that you are losing the supplies, but the price of those supplies are rising rapidly. We observe an increased price of almost double for coffee from Sumatra at that time. So because the nature of the coffee business is sort of like forward contract, meaning you agree to deliver 1 or 2 containers the previous year and you deliver it in the next harvest. So hedging and anticipating the harvest is at the core of your risk and existence as a commodity company. So that's why you cannot discount sustainability, and especially the environmental one, from the business model when running a coffee company. The second rationale is that like many developing countries that are producing coffee, smallholders actually the major overwhelming contributors to the coffee in Indonesia. More than 90% of the Indonesian coffee actually produced by smallholders whose land holdings are not larger than 2 hectares. Even the median size of land holding of coffee farms in Indonesia is between 0.8 to 1.2 hectares. In my background here is actually Lake Toba, located in North Sumatra in the region called Lintong. It is one of the most prominent area for coffee regions in this location. In this region, farmers are 3rd generation farmers. So they inherit the coffee farm from their parents and from the grandparents. So their land holdings actually slightly smaller than the other parts of Indonesia. In this region, the median land holding is only between 3,000 to 4,000 meters square, and that's 0.3 to 0.4 hectares, much lower. And the third rationale is actually that sustainability in coffee production, as I mentioned earlier, could help address poverty issues among smallholders, and at the same time have the potential to curb deforestation rate. The reason I'm saying that is many of the agricultural farmers in Indonesia, maybe for lack of better terms, blame price as the reason why they are getting so little revenue from their produces. But what actually happened is that they are producing at a very lower capacity from what the nature could provide. To give you a comparative view, average Arabica farmers in Indonesia could produce between 400 to 500 kilograms of coffee, green bean coffee per hectare. That's nothing compared to what the average Arabica coffee farmers produce, that is north of 2 tons per hectare. All right. This is mind-boggling for one, because Vietnam only taken up coffee production since Doi Moi, since the late 80s, and they learned it from Indonesia. And this is a major learning that the Indonesian coffee stakeholders need to internalize, that they need to, and we need to embed sustainability in the business model. And if farmers could produce coffee, say at 750 kilo or 1 ton per hectare, they become more resilient despite the fluctuations of price that are being influenced at the global market. So that is one way we can make the farmers more resilient from the financial point of view. And if they are more resilient from the financial point of view, there is no need for farmers to find another plot of land close or within the forest to grow more coffee. So in that sense, you providing the incentive for the farmers not to go deeper into the forest to produce coffee. That's one small illustration in how we think about this rationale. If you can go to the next slide, please. Fadli, can we go to the next slide? Right. So this is the data that I gathered from the previous work that talked about the distributions of sample that we have gathered in Aceh and North Sumatra provinces. This is to your left hand side. They talk about the median productions of coffee farmers in Arabica region in Indonesia. And here we see from the statistical data that majority of the farmers are still producing below the 500 kilogram per hectare benchmark. What we need to do is to shift the hump of this curve slightly to the right. So the median could be between at the number of 750 to 800 kilograms per hectare. For instance, if your coffee farmers producing coffee at 500 kilograms per hectare and you have like 1 hectare plot of land, the coffee price for green bean, let's say, is 100,000 rupiah per kg. You get 50 million rupiah on annual basis. That's on average less than 5 million of rupiah per month, not counting the cost that you have to incur to grow coffee, for labor, for agri input, etc. But if you are producing coffee, at, for instance, say 1,000 ton, you get double the amount of money at the same price, and you can actually getting more revenue from your productions of coffee. And not only that, when we talk about how environment become the supporting system of the coffee production. We can talk also about how the quality of the coffee cup affects. For instance, biodiversity positively affects the coffee cup profile. It is research in the World Coffee Research Organization that the more diverse the coffee plantations, the more it becomes resilient to climate change or to sudden change in rain patterns, for instance, or dry patterns, the more it is resilient against pest and disease. The problem currently we are facing in Indonesia is that the temperature in the higher elevation area where Arabica coffee is being planted is increasing at an alarming rate that allows the pests and disease to arrive at this elevation to which they previously haven't been able to venture. What it means for the farmers is that many of the coffee beans that they are producing will have defects. That means one, their net positive, their net productivity is become negative, and the cup profiles become negatively adverse because you get this sort of like insects invested coffees that, if not sorted properly, could affect the quality of the cup. And if you are a coffee company running the business in these commodities, you need to hire more workers to sort this coffee compared to what you previously done. So this is why when we talk about sustainability in coffee, environmental commitment and impact is one of the more important things to focus on. If you can go to the next slide. Now, the biggest challenges are actually how do we able to not only account but deliver this impact that have goal to help farmers attain higher yield for their coffee farms, but also become more improving the quality in order to, when they increase the added value of the coffee products. And as mentioned before, biodiversity is one critical importance here. And not only biodiversity, when we talk about plants per se, meaning like coffee and the other trees or plants in that farm, but also biodiversity from the coffee variety itself. Recent research also from the World Coffee Organization talking about how when you have more than 2 or 3 varieties of coffee in the same plot of land, it would induce cross variety breeding and fruition, and it will produce a variety or a coffee cherry that could become more resistant toward climate change pattern. That's one on the biodiversity credit. The second, we can also talk about coffee in agroforestry setting, meaning farmers actually come into agreement with forestry company, for instance, to grow coffee under the forest canopy. And in that agreement, farmers agree to help protect the forest trees in that area, while they'll be able to plant certain numbers of coffee trees in that region. And this is the model that has been working in West Java in Indonesia, whereby farmers can lease the land or the forest, the pine forest from the Perhutani, the state-owned forestry company, in which farmers then group themselves into village level forest coffee farmers organization, and they are also in agreement with the company in terms of like the gross split from the harvest they have on an annual basis. If you're working in the oil and gas sector, you understand the term gross split from Indonesian oil and gas sector. That is from 100% of the harvest that you produce, certain percentage is being allocated to whoever have the deed to the land, and that could be varied from one village to the other. The percentage varies from 5% to 20%. And the other way to ensure impact is being delivered is that introducing a more organic focus in terms of like agri input to assure the long-term environmental support for productivity. This is a lesson learned that's being internalized now in Vietnam. The country that I mentioned earlier has increasing and in a very high productivity compared to Indonesia, which currently have a different coffee sustainability problem. They are facing the problem of over fertilizing and overuse of water. Because if you are using too much of the chemical compounds into the soil, it will sort of like depleted the capacity of the soil to provide nutrients, towards the plants. So you can become more and more dependent on the chemical fertilizer, but at a certain point, the soil just give up. So that's what Vietnam is facing now. Learning from coffee farmers in Brazil, of all places, there's a group of farmers there leading the movement of conservation coffee that try to address this issue of over-fertilizing by going full organic in their coffee farms. They mentioned to us around 2-3 years ago that the time it takes to replenish the environmental support capacity for the soil to the initial stage is around 10 years. If you are at the state of your farm is depending so much on chemical fertilizer. So that's actually the cost that you need to internalize, you need to count when you are using chemical fertilizers in the coffee farms and other commodities in the longer term. So to give you with one last illustration, in the right bottom corner of the slide, you see the famous circle of donuts produced and campaigned by Kate Raworth, an economist from Oxford, that basically talks about and illustrate, what the environmental in ESG means for not only commodities but also in other industry. At the moment, Indonesia coffee production is at the shortfall, meaning we are not producing the capacity that is best for us as human and for the environment. We are producing at capacity so low that many farmers just don't care about their coffee until it's harvest time. But we also don't want to produce coffee at the level of what Vietnam is currently producing, although they're producing a certainly high capacity, but what they're doing is actually an overshoot. That's why they come up with whole different problems these days with over fertilizer and overuse of water. So that's why one easy solution is that to get to the the middle point between the shortfall and the overshoot, and is the safe space for environment and for the humanity to produce commodities. Coffee being one, other commodities also could be borrow the same concept of sustainability. That's all from me. I'm looking forward to the question and answer session. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Heru. I've learned a lot. And I also am now very tempted to go make myself another coffee, but I will abstain for another few minutes here. So we're not gonna jump straight into questions for you, Heru. I want to protect a little bit of discussion time at the end. I've written down a few questions that I would love to throw your way. So just hang in there. But really quickly, I'm just really interested with the contrast between what Batiar was saying from a very high level of these large financial institutions in Indonesia being compelled through regulation to report on sustainability, or essentially on ESG. And then, in a very different example, we've got Heru, who's from the very outset building a small company with the E and the S as foundational elements of the business plan. So it's really kind of different sides, right? You've got the regulatory demand side, and then you've got the organic sort of ground up looking at opportunity side. So really thank you for providing that interesting glimpse into the world of sustainable coffee. Now, let's dive into the S. To help guide us into the S, I'm really thrilled to introduce Dr. Maria Ratnanansi, Dr. Ratna. She holds a PhD in environmental sciences from the University of Indonesia and has 30 years experience as an environmental economist with expertise in urban and rural development planning, strategic environmental asset, sustainable landscape management, and economic valuation. Dr. Ratna assisted innovative programs including strategic environmental assessment, green growth development, and payment for environmental services, especially on forest and water resources and loss of ecosystem functions. She acquired valuable experience while working with the central and also local government on developing stakeholder outreach and green growth planning and monitoring tools. She has worked with various local governments on mainstreaming environmental sustainability into spatial and development planning. So without further ado, Dr. Ratna, we're thrilled to hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Thanks everybody, also Pak Anton, and also to CRMS and Cardno to invite me to join this webinar. So I'm afraid of I don't want to make everything more confused because after Pak Heru explained about the E, then I will jump to the S. It become complicated more. Well, yeah. So I agree that Pak Anton mentioned that this is a mega trend today to understand the ESG, yeah, and also how to mitigate all the risk. And it's also mentioned that this is the non-financial evaluation tools. And then I read on the chat question, then how to calculate all those the ESG into economic value, economic term. So we have to differentiate between financial and then economic. So to me, there is a tool that we can use to value, to calculate the qualitative and quantitative become the monetary term using the what you call it, extended cost benefit analysis. So I think this is another methodology that we have to understand, but how to measure all these E and S and G, it become one package for the investment. But there's another session, maybe another lecture to come. Yeah. Yes. When I think you, Brian, mentioned that ESG is or Bahtiar, this is we can divide it into two: the responsible for the investors to the stakeholders and also to the shareholders. So it's very important to invite the shareholders to understand the ESG as well. Yeah, because there are a lot of things that they have to understand, not to just try to reach the highest benefit and ignoring the S and G, but they have to understand as well how it will work and it will boost their economic return. So for example, this morning, if you have a time to read the Compass, there's issue that Musimas ban or get the critical because they export the palm oil to Iran. So this is one issue. And then if you had the chance to see last month, Musimas in Riau also get the people demo because they found out that Musimas plant their palm oil in the peatland area in the protected forest. So we can learn that you cannot ignore S in this ESG, or when I saw the METI, and then I said the S become the letters important.
It caught up though. It was catching up. It was catching
right,
up.
I hope. Yeah. So this is very interesting. So because we have to understand how the S will play a significant impact in this ESG. And well, Pak Bahtiar explained about the OJK and then all the regulation to come up with the sustainable report. But for me, for myself, especially, and also I understand Pak Heru also facing the similar case, that in fact, when you come to the field, then the story is totally changed. Yeah, and there's one thing that we have to understand or to learn is we have also Undang-Undang Nomor 32, the Environmental Management Law number 32 year 2009. That's also become the umbrella of doing the ESG. Yeah, so this is very interesting to understand how it will work and how the social function will work hand in hand with the environmental aspect or dimension. Yeah, I agree that if you're hungry, then you cannot talk about the environment, right? And then if you're seeing something not right in the field, suppose we are living in a very dense forest, then investor come and then they just destroy the land. Of course, there will be social movement maybe, or social painful
or repercussions maybe.
Right. Yeah. So this become and then how we can say that this big company have a sustainable report. So that's just one example. So I will just go to my presentation. I hope it will not discourage you who are trying to do the ESG. So, but this is the social impact, not only the inside of the company, because the S element on the ESG stand for labor standard and human rights and community, health and safety, and customer responsibility. So we can divide this into two. One is the internal of the company, and the other one is the external. Social means the community. Yeah. So this we have to understand when it will be blended together, when I am discouraged to work in this company because all the labor standard didn't work, and then the health and safety also didn't work, then I will become not only internal, but I can also influence the external society. So this is very, very important. Then we have to talk about the G one. Yeah, the governments to really elaborate the internal aspect on the social. So can we move to my slides, please? Right. So I divided into three actually. One is policies and rules, and then the second one is the challenge, and the third one the cases in Indonesia. So when we talk about the policies and rules, again, this is in line with what Anton mentioned in the beginning, that we are now facing the sustainable development. I put the economic in the bracket because people usually said that sustainable economic, but sustainable economic development means broader. So social inclusiveness, resilience, healthy ecosystem, and sustainable economic growth. I think this is one packet that you cannot just drop one to come to the sustainable development. So just like Pak Heru mentioned that about the resilience, this is very important. Yeah, how to make them have a resilience in doing their business, even though this is a small business. And how to include the social culture to protect the people and improve the value system is also important. So I just try to offer you, the audience, that whether do we have to stick, if I am the, let's say, palm oil producers, do we have only stick that our mind, our view is only talking about the palm oil? Or we also care for others who having their own land, having their own livelihood. For example, the coffee one. Then why don't we just hand in hand with them in terms of partnership, for example? So we support the coffee, but I also can grow my palm oil good, better. Yeah, so this is also the way to look how we sensitive with the local people, the local area. I think if we have to find examples for where the conflicting land happen in Indonesia, I think you can just open the map, the globe, and then just point your fingers. Here is the conflict there and here and there. So now become very interesting or important to understand how when you come to the area where the people grow coffee or maybe cocoa in Papua, then you come with palm oil, then you destroy their coffee or palm oil. Of course, you will hurt them. So this is a start, yeah, of having social problem. So again, this is very important to understand. When you come to the place as a guest, because you are not coming from there, this is important to understand what is happening in there. I mean, what sort of understand the local situation, understand the local knowledge, understand the local wisdom. Yeah, because this is very essential, and then this is very, very, very not tricky, but this is will determine your investment, whether you will go long or you will have or facing a problem in the initial steps. So enlarge the level of trust, especially at the high inequality areas. When Pak Heru said it's in Aceh, in the upper land, of course, the inequality is very high because the infrastructure is not really good. And then if you can compare also in the Papua area, this is the inequality of the welfare is also very high. So when you come, the investors or the company come in that area, please, this is the level of trust, especially in that area, is very important. So jangan tipu-tipu, if orang Papua said. Yeah? So never tipu-tipu them. This will be a very serious problem. I can show you on the case. I heard noise there. Yeah, so the social issues, intensity and level of conflict, we can also differentiate between whether this is fundamental issues. Yeah, I mean, this is already happening in certain area for long, and when you come, then you means that you have to be ready to play or to be part of the fundamental issues in that area. If you cannot make it better, then please be aware that you need to have a very huge amount as a social cost to cover this issue. Yeah, so again, I saw the participant is also coming from the insurance and also financial institution. So this is very important to understand when the company come, and then you have to understand whether there is a fundamental issue in that location or not. Or there is a secondary issues, means that maybe, I can give you example, maybe company A happened before, they have issues with the local people. And then the company A has finished the license, and then you as a company B come to that area to replace or to get a similar HGU, for example. But you have to understand that this social issue is already happening before. So then you have to understand that be careful or have to understand, have to learn what is going on before you come. And the third one is different point of view. Maybe this is very simple example to me. If we are coming from Jakarta and then we go to the, let's say, to the indigenous people, yeah, you cannot come with your mind as a Jakarta people, right? Because you have to come to understand the point of view of the local people. See, this is the social issues that you have to understand in doing your business, or even in doing your review or doing the report. So this is the three fundamental secondary issues and different point of view must be understood very well. Then how to come with this idea is talk to the people, of course. Yeah. And if you make a wrong wrong steps, that this is the time consuming to release the tension, the social issues. And then if you get the wrong advice, means the conflict will be there. Yeah. And then the common issue is usually people have a good solidarity and also interdependency. So what happened in Sumatra might happen in Kalimantan as well for the similar case. So now in the era of gadget and also social media, this you cannot avoid this one. And the generic solution won't work because the case will be different. Although actually the case, for example, about the conflicting land, but the culture, the people in the different area is also different. So you are in Jakarta cannot just have a generic solution. Okay, once the conflict in there, then give the money to the people. No. Yeah. So the action is, again, understand the local situation, understand the local knowledge, and also the local wisdom. This is very important. Next slides, please. Yeah. So the challenge now is I will not say all the negative thing, but let's see the positive one. So if you do the positive thing, then means that you're ready to begin with the social dynamic and healthy competition, then you have to support that. Means that just like Pak Heru said, if the people there using a lot of fertilizer, then we have to understand how to change the behavior. Because again, if in Java, then if you go to the farmers, if my paddy leaves greener than you, means that I have a better wealth and also better production. But of course, this is not the truth. Yeah. So again, this is we need to emphasize them to do the or to the partnership to have the healthy competition among the people in there, and then change the social dynamic and then become the social change. This will low cost and then low risk. But in negative situation, if again, this is I put this in a free rider here. For example, is I just learned that from my friend in a certain area, after they got the land certification under the president's program right now, the problem on land not stop. Yeah, because the idea, if the farmer have the land certificate and then they have a secure secure production and not become illegal anymore, and also they can access to the financial asset, financial institution. But it doesn't happen like that, because the free rider always look at the chance to come into the situation. What I mean is when people have a certificate, then they can sell the land more higher price. Yeah. So this is also not the ending story of how the good we are in policies, and we try to end up the poverty case, but again come again with another case that might rise. And then the second one is corporate community investment. Actually this is also part of G, that we cannot do it by the S itself or the E itself. Recognizing the company has responsibility both to local areas and society in general, and also structure community involvement in company programs. Let the people know that we are aware of them. Let the people know that we also support the government program. So this is become the part of the G, the governance. What happened in the field, usually the people who stand for the G pretend knows everything and report everything's good, but actually not. See what I mean? Yeah, so the G is very important to support number 2, how to the corporate community investment become accepted by the society and also the government, is how we can involve ourselves, the investment, the company for our part responsible to the local and also social in general. Usually, if I may say in a bahasa, since usually they pretend like a preman yang bergaya and then say, hey, I'm coming from the company, so we have to do this. But actually it won't work. So this is the G has to playing an important part. So the KPI measurement on number 3 is measured in terms of value created to the stakeholders. Yeah, again, this is the G. The G is also playing an important part. Yeah. Then the effective communication have to be in place all the time in there. The new technology, the media, and then the individuals, just like I mentioned in the previous one, that if you read the Compass, then it happened now about the case in Riau. So next slide, please. Yeah, I will move quick. So this is the cases that happening in Indonesia, and actually this is the offering to you, the company, how to do the social aspect on the sustainable landscape. One is doing the partnership, as I told you, how to the capacity building, best management practices, meeting the quality standards, and provide good quality input, and stop the brokers, because the better price directly benefited to the both parties. This is important. Yeah, and then let them be, because the issues of higher conservation value areas for the indigenous people to protect their livelihood is very important. So don't try to bother them, because this will generate the social issues in a global tension. And data and mapping also is important, because once the company involved in the smallholders into the institution or kelompok tani atau koperasi, and then do the traceability sources and involved in the government program, then your company get the credit from the government and also the community as well. And then the next is FPIC. Again, this is the G playing important part, because without doing the good FPIC, then the conflict will be there. Yeah. And this is the jurisdiction approach. If Pak Heru talk about the coffee, I will talk about the sagu, for example. If I say that sagu to help the Papuan people, then all of you will agree. But how to do it? You do the traditional way, or you do the mechanical way. If you do the mechanical way, and then you will just cut all the sagu tree in, let's say, 2 or 3 years in a certain hectares, and you need more than 10 years to grow the sagu. Then the question is, the difference years between 10 to 3 years means you have 7 years left. For the community, what will you do? Yeah, so this is should be wise exit. Next, as the conclusion. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the conclusion is don't do the we have to treat the community as social subject, to do the social safeguard and do no harm. And again, I just put one to remind you on the environmental impact assessment. Again, don't tipu-tipu, don't make a fake document, because this is, I mean, the people who really work on the environmental aspect understand about this EIA. And there is another thing, SEA, Strategic Environmental Assessment, is also coming, and this is, I think, this is a good to do the inclusiveness, resilience, and healthy ecosystem to sustainable income of the people. Yeah, I think that's from me. I'm happy to have, if you have a question. Thank you, Brian.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Ratna. I really hope that the more scrutiny that is put on the high-level sustainability reports, the more attention and focus and detail and lack of tipu-tipu will happen at the ground level, the community level, the farmer level. I hope that those two things progress in tandem. But thank you also for providing a very realistic look at actually how difficult things can be and how complicated things can be once you're really trying to implement. When you're going beyond just writing a report or publishing some writing, but when you're actually trying to implement ESG principles on the ground, it's complicated, and the S becomes very important. I'm gonna go very quickly. If you could go to the next slide, please. I'm gonna go very quickly through the G. We don't have heaps of time, and I really want to get a good bit of discussion time in. So I'm gonna blow through the G quite quickly. We have the benefit of a lot of people going before the G section that have touched on what the G is anyways. You saw Ratna talk about how much the G plays into the S. And when a company has good corporate governance, a lot of the elements of S are improved as well. Again, at the beginning, we talked about how inextricable or inseparable, sorry, the E and the S and the G really are. But let's spend just a quick flash on G. Next slide, please. I'm just going to cover the essentials here. Yeah, perfect. So as we know, the G is for corporate governance or governance, which can be defined as a system of controls and procedures by which an individual company is managed. And when you have weak corporate governance, there's lots of common problems that manifest. They not only do they manifest in your social interactions with your community, as Ratna said, or your environmental issues, as Heru mentioned with the, say, for example, the Vietnam case study, but you can also have lack of proper oversight, inadequate protections of minorities, conflict of interest, all sorts of issues can crop up from just having bad corporate organization and governance. We even know that bad corporate governance is one of the main contributors to the GFC of 2008 and 2009. So this is serious stuff. I included the Enron example there. We all remember that, when very, very large companies can be brought down by what seems to be minutia of government controls. Getting your house in order is actually quite important. On the other hand, when you do have your house in order and your corporate governance is looking quite well, you reduce risk, improvements happen to capital flow, reputation is typically boosted, and all the benefits that come with that, improved reporting, etc. There's a litany of positive benefits that come with that. Next slide, please. None of this will come to a surprise for any of you, because in fact, the G element of ESG is the most commonly understood. It's the most accepted, and it's also the most reported on factor of the E and the S and the G. It's the most clearly defined, and there's not really a question of whether or not should a company have good governance or bad governance. I mean, even the Milton Friedman economists of the previous century would agree, yes, you need good governance. But what we're finding now and starting to unravel and unpeel is how much that good governance is linked to your social and your environmental aspects as well. Yep, markets for a very long time have learned to distinguish good versus bad governance. This was happening ages ago. And like I said, this was kind of one of the first ones to be measured. Great, I think that's enough for the G. I think we kind of understand it. This is the most straightforward, I think, of the three. So why don't we jump to the next slide? If anybody has additional questions about the G, or they want to dive deeper into the G, or ask how it's interconnected, no problem. Let's try and bring that up in the discussion section. So a lot of you have sent me questions through the Q&A on Zoom. Thank you so much for that. And I also want to invite you to just throw as many questions as you can think of, if you have them, into mentimeter.com, same login, and those questions will just start to pop up as we discuss. So Fadli, if you could actually jump over to the Mentimeter results page, we should be able to see those questions pop up real time. And as new ones come, I'll try to field them. But as Fadli pulls those up, I'm just going to go ahead and jump to a few questions that I've already received through the Zoom portal. Yeah. So let's first jump to a question from Maman. So this question is, in the beginning, you mentioned that ESG is a non-financial tool. Is there any tool that's able to convert ESG into financial or quantitative terms? Basically allowing the investor to measure ESG risk precisely. So I'm going to send this over to Batiar, because I think, Batiar, you actually do this using the GRI mechanics. Could you touch on this and explain how ESG actually can be used quantitatively to measure a company?
Can you repeat the question one more time, Brian?
Maman is asking, in response to what I said at the beginning, that ESG is non-financial tool. Maman is asking, is there any way to make ESG really quantitative in financial terms, so that you can measure ESG risk really precisely? And I think you actually probably do exactly that.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to answer the question. Well, actually, if I understand correctly, the question says that how do you convert when you spend some amount of money, effort on ESG, managing ESG factors? How do you calculate the impact? How do you measure if those efforts translate to financial return? If that's the question, of course, there hasn't been a system to translate that into financial terms. It has financial returns. It has to be done through academic studies. In fact, I'm referring to your previous slide, Brian. I also learned that recently, or up to recently, there are more than 2,000 academic studies, right, on the relationship between ESG activities and financial return. And as you've shown in your presentation, almost 70% shows a positive relation. So that would be my answer for that. But of course, if in terms of how do you measure the improvement of your ESG factors management, that can be done by many ESG reporting standards, like GRI, for example. Using GRI standard, you can manage and then you can improve the performance of economy-related criteria, environmental-related criteria, and social-related criteria. For the environmental related criteria, of course, you can improve the waste produced by your company, and the emission also produced as a result of your company's operation. On the social side, of course, you can improve the number of your operation that has been assessed based on human rights assessment and social assessment, for example. And also you can measure how the percentage of gender equality in your workforce, of course, and you can use that criteria to improve the number, and of course to improve equality inside of your company.
Yeah, excellent. And I think just to accentuate what you're saying is you actually can make the non-financial measures quantitative, which is such a cool aspect of ESG. Is you can start to quantify things that were previously thought unquantifiable in 20, 30 years ago, when it was thought only profit loss and hard numbers could be quantified. But ESG is a tool that allows you to start to measure using numbers, social and environmental things that are harder to pin down and measure. I'm gonna jump to I think this is a great one. Does ESG reporting need to be assured by a third party? I'm first gonna chuck that over to Heru. just from your experience with Veritas, do you think that ESG metrics should be certified by a third party?
Thank you for the questions. I think it also a little bit related to the question earlier by Indradi about the many standards on these reportings, right? So if we talk about the coffee industry, for instance, certain markets have certain preferences with regards to the provider of these solutions. And to be absolutely honest with you, having a third party could guarantee the objective and independence of the reporting, absolutely, but it does not protect the industry from any full or conflict of interest as well, because the problem would be whether or not the supply chain, for instance, can find a loophole in that system. Let me give you a quick example. Rainforest Alliance is one of the leading solutions for coffee sustainability globally. And if you are an exporting company based out of Medan in Indonesia, you could, verify or certify your supply chain. But that doesn't necessarily talk about how many of the tonnage of your supply is actually being certified. And just be easily said that as an importer based out of Portland in the US, this exporting company has certification, but you want their non-certified coffee. So in this, it gives a presence that you are in the business of a responsible company who has certification for their coffee, but not directly buying the coffee that is being certified and then price premium. So there's a lot of loopholes currently around the industry. But yes, having an independent, objective third party is always the better options, rather than imagine one company have to own their own certification for ESG and spend that much amount of resources just to confirm what they already wanted to say, right? What's the use of that?
And thank you, Heru. I think this is why it's so important for a consolidation to happen amongst all of the standards and frameworks that exist out there for ESG. Because once you have a consolidation, then all of a sudden you can start to get really useful certifications that have less of those loopholes in them that you were just describing. So I'm really optimistic by the big five of the ESG world coalescing, because hopefully then ISO can come up with a standard that matches and measures the exact same thing. And hopefully companies, when they report on ESG, they can't just make up what elements of ESG they want to report on. They have to report on the whole thing, because then I think you're going to start to actually see companies rising to the top that are taking this seriously. And then hopefully, like what Ibu Ratna was saying, you might start to see real improvements on the ground, where if you're just taking loopholes, you're not actually going to see a difference on the ground. Ibu Ratna, I want to throw this question over to you. It says, let me just stop the scrolling here. It says, how do you choose which indicators to choose to track progress and report against? In particular, what types of social indicators are commonly used? So I think you're well suited to talk. What social indicators should companies be tracking, and which ones are you aware of are commonly used in ESG?
Yeah, for the S indicators, I think you can also search from the GRI, and also we also do the indicators for social impact assessment in many studies, that you will look at how much the improvement of the community in a macro term, then you will just count the how much the improvement of the income per capita of the people who live in a certain area. That's if you look at the macro one, and then the second one is how many local institutions built, or such as cooperation, but the real cooperation, yeah, who really established in there, and then how many of kemitraan partnership that you can also see in the area. And because of having that social indicators on that one, then you can trace another elements to build the resilience. So I think on the social one, and also I just see from the scroll about the loss of social welfare. So, for example, a project in, let's say, in a certain area that will replace the social people, then you have to see whether they will be better off rather than before the project start or the investment start. Yeah. For example, if you move people from an area that they grow or they do the fish in let's say in a river, yeah, pakai tambak the fish pond in the open access area. But if you do something in the upper part, and then you destroy or you just throw the waste into the river, then the fish will gone. Then the foregone income you have to calculate as the social indicators as well. Yeah, the loss of the foregone income, and also the opportunity, better opportunity to get a better livelihood. And then again, in the beginning, then you will see how many kemitraan partnership that happen in there, and then how many institutional built in that area. That's also part of the social indicators. Well, of course, there are many, but you can pick the big one as an indicator, because if you can find that one, means that everything's also on the right way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. There's.
If I may add to that question, Brian. So
yes.
Considering which indicator that you should report, and this doesn't only relate with sustainability, social indicators. I really believe that companies need to report the most significant ESG impacts that their companies may result. Okay, so it's not like you select the indicators that you are comfortable to report on governance, environmental, and social, but you have to report the most significant impacts of your companies have on social, governance, and environmental. And I'm of course basing this statement based on the GRI standard, and it's different for every industry, right? Mining industry has different ESG risk than pharmaceutical companies. For pharmaceutical companies, product safety, customer safety and health is the most important. While for mining companies, it might be environmental protection, the rights of indigenous people, so on.
All right, let me add to that, Batiar. How do companies implement ESG during the pandemic? This is a question here on the right, and I think it's fascinating.
I think all the speakers can share their thought on this. How? Can you repeat that again, because it's quite an interesting question?
How to report on ESG or implement ESG in your company during the pandemic? Because people might think that there's nothing that you can do right now. You just have to wait. But is that true?
Well, actually, ESG is even more important during this pandemic. We've seen ESG is more important during this pandemic. Okay, because especially on the health and safety issues of employees and community. We've seen a number of reports on environmental and human rights that companies, especially leadership from companies, is very important. The CEOs, the top management should, if not just produce new statement or procedure, but they have to come, they have to make sure, they have to give, guarantee for their workers and community that they do care about their health, especially during this pandemic, and discrimination as well. And there will be no, for example, termination because of economic factors.
Yeah,
Brian, if I may.
I agree with you. Heru, yeah.
I would like to echo what Bahtiar mentioned. I think the pandemic really is the time where and when the ESG, especially in any source of financial support, really counts for the supply chain. This is the time where companies can really make, the most significant difference in every dollar they're invested in the supply chain. And I think there's certainly, parameters of social distancing that you need to consider, but it shouldn't discourage company to resort to any less even during this time.
Yeah, Ibu Ratna, do you have anything to contribute on the ESG during the pandemic question?
Yeah, I think if internal from the company, I think Bahtiar and also Harry already answered, but on the social aspect, I think I mentioned in my slides that for the what I call it, the this is extra situation. Then if you do come back again what the social element, if you have a very good relationship, very good communication, then you still can continue with whatever situation, then the ESG still happening in there. And social aspect, the impact on the COVID to the social impact will be not really affected to the company, because the people, the social understand very well what's going on. Again, this is how the communication among the company and the social is really good.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I'm going to just let us go over just a few more minutes. I know that we've reached our time. If you need to jump off, that's okay. But I'm going to end this at 2:05, or 5:05, or wait a minute, sorry, 11:05. My time conversion's not great. The last question I want us to cover, I saw one about the size of your company. We're talking about those big financial institutions submitting those big reports. This can seem quite daunting for a small or medium business. What can a small company do to start to integrate ESG? Is ESG relevant to a small company? And Heru, I have to throw it over to you first to answer this question.
Thank you for the major questions here. And I think if you talk about the structure and the size of company and the changes that the industry need to make with regards to ESG, I think that the smaller company have more advantage, because one, they don't have that many bottom line, and they can adjust rather flexibly to any changing commitment, environmentally speaking, for instance. And if you're looking at the major revolutions that are happening across industry, it usually happens involving smaller players. For instance, how I forget the chain of supermarkets in the US actually leading, like Trader Joe's, for instance, leading the revolutions in profiling traceability or ethical source in a product is nothing that Walmart might have think about it, but they have not been able to do it in the same level that Trader Joe's has been able to do it. So I think smaller company have more, I would say, dare to say, room for movement. But if we're talking about the intended, scale of changes that we want, for instance, for environmental or ecological change to happen, we cannot do it without the big players.
Yeah, Brilliant. Yeah, and I think your company is a living testament to that, how you've built it with ESG in its very foundation. So yeah, I think it's clear that ESG is indeed relevant to any size company to help them access more opportunity and to help them reduce risk that could come about if you don't have strong E and S and G. I think we're really, we're out of time, unfortunately. I feel like we could keep pushing this discussion quite a lot longer. The panelists that are here with us today are truly fascinating. Thank you so much, Ratna and Heru and Batiar for joining and sharing your expertise. I myself feel like I've learned a lot from you guys. Yeah, and so thank you on behalf of CRMS and Cardno. Thank you very much. And CRMS has kindly been filming this. Nita, are you able to share any content or material around to the participants and the speakers after this session finalizes?
Yes, the webinar materials will be sent to your email after you fill out the feedback form, which link to the feedback form will be shown right after the webinar. So we'll share the presentation materials, yes, right.
Excellent.
After the webinar.
Great. Well, I have nothing more to say then. Thank you guys so much. And thanks everyone. We'll speak soon. Hopefully we can have another one of these.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So participants, just to remind you that the link will be appear any time now, the link to the feedback form. So please just scan it and fill out the feedback form. And please also to stay tuned to CRMS next programs by visiting our website, www.crmsindonesia.org, and also to visit our YouTube channel and subscribe, of course, since we'll have a very interesting videos uploaded in the next few days. The recording of the webinar will also be provided in our YouTube channel. So participants and speakers, thank you very much once again for the discussion today. And we will see you in our next programs. Thank you and bye. Okay.